First of all, I wanted to, thank you about writing this incredible book. So, what inspired you to write Capitalism on this topic, especially, and for youngsters like us, what do you, talked about in this area of field?
It was a long process. You can tell from my gray hair that I've been around a while, and I I have an obsession to know and to understand, and so I began early on in life, starting with my master's of electrical engineering degree, and then when I was young, I began reading philosophy, history, psychology, attempting to understand what's going on. History in particular, and trying to put together a view of how humans behaved, how the intersection of human nature and history. And then in the 90s, and I began to wonder why everything came to an end. If you look through history, the Roman Empire came to an end, the Inca Empire came to an end, the Indus Valley civilization came to an end. And the question is, why does that happen? Why does essentially everything that humans do come to an end? In the 90s, I had lived long enough and had enough thoughts that I began putting together a thought, a set of ideas as to why this was the case. Now, that's long and complicated, but in the early 90s, I decided that, and I was US centric mostly. I think about the world in general, but I'm located in the US and I'm fascinated by the dynamics of what's going on here. And so I came up with the idea that the US was going to enter in the beginning of the 21st century a crisis. And that crisis was likely to be existential. So I began filling that in. In the meantime, we had the great financial crisis. Global warming became important. Now, a strange thing that I do is that I write to understand what I think. And so I wrote books for myself on the great financial crisis and on global warming. And the point of doing that was not to be able to hand wave, not to be able to just say things, but I had to have the data. I had to have a backup behind what I said. And at the end of this long answer, my book on global warming left me completely dissatisfied because the question became, why is there global warming? And what is the dynamic and what does it lead to? And what is the larger picture of what's going on? That led me to consideration of sustainability. The fact that a lack of sustainability is what's causing global warming. And then to a conclusion that capitalism was contributing to that lack of sustainability. And here we are.
No, it's kind of very fascinating when you talked about so much things in your book, and some of the topics are very, noticeable in this coming future. Because as a humans, I think when it comes to capitalism and environment, I kind of really, feel deep-hearted to think about the society and the people and the cultures and the behavior that you talked about in the book. So, I wanted to really know about what are the downfalls in the coming years about capitalism and in the big companies, tech companies, big companies taking over our society, and kind of that you also shared in your book. What's your take on that?
Well, we're the human condition. I don't want to say human progress because my argument is that progress is going to go into reverse. But the human condition is one of continual change, continual growth, and then collapse, and then growth, and then decline. And one of the theses of my book is that we're in a period of decline. We're in the life is a cycle, and nature is a cycle. And we're on the downside of that cycle. And cycles are necessary. We build up all kinds of excesses and dysfunction in a cycle. And then we have to cleanse all of that out. And we're in a cleansing process. And so all of the dysfunction that we have accumulated over the past cycle needs to be cleared out before we can launch another good positive cycle. And so we're kind of, I personally am blessed and trapped. I'm blessed to have lived in a prosperous nation at the peak of its powers and the peak of its material accomplishments. So I've had a spectacular life compared to essentially every human that existed on Earth. Now we're in the down cycle. Now the United States and the world in general needs to revise what it's doing. It needs to go through a down cycle. And so what we should expect over the next decade, maybe 2 decades, is more deterioration, more strife, more change, more government, a continuing change to the left in political views and ideas. All of these things are integrated into what it means to deteriorate. For instance, moving to the left is, it's oversimplified. Moving to the left is simply a symptom of, my God, things are coming unglued. I need help. Who's going to help me? The government's going to help me. So please, government, help me. That's a complete oversimplification. But once you think about this deterioration cycle, there are just a lot of implications that fall out of that, like more government, moving to the left in terms of political action. In terms of tech, I think that's a completely different concept. I think, you can look at tech in 3 or 4 different dimensions. The first dimension is that it has these monopoly characteristics that come from so-called network effects. And we don't have economic models for that. So we've got to develop new thoughts and new models, excuse me, sorry, new models and new regulations about how to think about these kinds of monopolies that are actually in some ways benefiting consumers. We used to think about monopolies in terms of being bad for consumers, but that's not what we're facing now. So we've got this uncertain view of what is a tech company. I think the second thing having to do with this deterioration is that tech companies, if you read the academic literature of many of the psychologists today, tech companies like TikTok and others are causing negative emotional reactions within people. And so what's happening is that during this deterioration process, we're having these reinforcing things happening on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok that make us think unconstructive thoughts. And so that's another effect of tech. I think the other thing is that tech is an expression of all of the excess in terms of material things that we have. I think with the exception of Google, which has some good attributes and bad, has everything, has good attributes and bad attributes, but which uniquely brings the world to your fingertips. The other tech companies are evidence of this this extreme prosperity that we've got, so that we spend a lot of money on effectively nothing, including video games and other things. And I think as the world becomes unwound, tech companies will also have to change dramatically.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. Today's social media is kind of really, give me the anxiety also when I look up to their feed. You talked about Facebook and TikTok, especially. So it's kind of give me, that kind of anxiety when I see the pages. Before reading your book, I was, not into really capitalism or in environment generally. But after reading it, I kind of more switched to human behaviors, why we do this and do that, think about the future of our society. What's, your thoughts process when you writing about this book, where reference with something, or you just kind of you interested in to something the world is gonna need this book, or you just come up with an idea, or you write this very important thing.
It's oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer. Let me see what I can come up with. I think it's two things simultaneously. Um, I don't know how many books I've read over the last decades. All these history and psychology and philosophy books, and as I read them, I take notes, and I file away the notes. Great quotes, great ideas. But the other thing that reading does for me is it creates these aha moments where I'm reading something and the author is making some argument, and it sets off something in my head. It brings things together, not necessarily what the author is saying, but the combination of things that are in my head. And then the author adds this one more bit to the things that are floating around in my head. And I say, okay, I think I got it. And then, so I will write that down as a main idea. And so when it came time, for instance, to write my book on global warming, I don't know how high my note pile was. It was probably, I don't know, several feet, maybe a meter tall. Um, and I had all these books with all the notes in the margins. And they were just still down into these other notes. And then over to the side were these lists of high level ideas that I had. And so then when I write, the first thing I do is I just dive in, and in the middle, I've got some chunk of ideas that I have, and they're pretty well formed. And so I'll put them down, and then I'll put another chunk down, and then I'll put another chunk down. And then I'll have to go research some more, because what I'll find is there's a hole in my thought process. I didn't consider something, somebody raised something that I don't understand. So I'll go research again, so that it becomes this iterative process. And then I go back and I rewrite the book from the top down. So that's what I hadn't thought about it before, but it's not deliberate. That's the process that just unfolded.
Yeah, that's something similar to my process when I read book, and I want I'm searching the key points where the authors made the argument about something, and that kind of hit me, and I just wrote it down in my notebook. And some quotes where I find very telling about something or share on my social media that people gonna find useful. So that's kind of I'm also storing that notes, that chunk of files that you talked about in the book. You talked about something, quality of life. So what's in terms of you quality of life should be for us?
Well, I just got through saying I've had one of the most incredible qualities of life that was possible, I think, for two reasons. One is it's not all about materialism. It's about other things. It's about other people. It's about community. It's about relationships. I've been in a wonderful marriage for over 45 years. And so it's quality of life is a very complicated concept. But one of the interesting things that I encountered when I was, or at least interesting to me, that I encountered when I was writing my book is I was trying to figure out some way to express this quality of life idea. And it came down not just to materialism, because for those to whom capitalism is good, and there are many, many people to whom it doesn't benefit. Okay. But for those who it benefits, it provides material things in just incredible quantities. But how do you distill this quality of life thing? And in my book, I did it in two ways. There's this, people have tried to quantify quality of life and happiness. And that's a really dicey idea, but people tried to do it. And one of the things that they did was something called a general progress indicator. And what they did was they tried to measure all the good things that come from life, and then all the bad things like pollution and crime and crowding and divorce and suicide that come from our cultures. And they put this all together in something called a genuine progress indicator. And what they decided, and they've got it, this exists for various countries, but what they decided for the United States, or what the general progress indicator indicated for quality of life in the United States, was that it peaked in the 1970s. In other words, up until the 1970s, conditions were getting better and some things were getting worse, but the good things outweighed the bad things. So in general, progress was being made overall in terms of all of the things they could measure in this quality of life indicator. But in the 1970s, it started coming down. And today we have the quality of life effectively of the 1950s. And again, it's things like traffic jams, it's pollution, it's divorce, it's murder rates, it's a lot of things. I think the other thing that I was interested in was measures of happiness. Now, that's another thing that I don't know how you really measure, but there are polls and other ways that they try to measure happiness. And happiness in the United States peaked in the 1950s. So these are indicators that, I can't begin to say that life in the United States is bad now. It's not. I mean, it has a lot of wonderful things, but by all measurements that I can find, material, sociological, and then the GPI and the measure of happiness, is deteriorating. And to me, one of the reasons that it's deteriorating is that capitalism is deteriorating underneath it.
100% on agree on that. The materialistic things, we human, as we think all the happiness are inside the all the gloriness, materialistic, cars, money. But as I read the books more and more, I kind of realize that all the things that happiness and peace are inside us. We just have to search for it, or it just live in the moment to be happy. I really appreciate your thoughts. So the title of your book, Capitalism is Past Its Sell by Date. So what do you mean by past its sell by date, if you can more elaborate on that?
Okay. When you go to the store and you buy a carton of milk, it has a sell by date on it. And basically what it's doing is it's warning you that the milk is deteriorating. From the time it was pasteurized, bacteria is destroying the milk, and that bacteria can be harmful to you in the end. And so at some point, the milk is undrinkable, because what it will do is it will poison you. Now, I don't want to go that far in terms of capitalism, because this is simply a metaphor and I don't want to take it too strongly. But what's happened is that capitalism has just been marvelous. Again, for the people that it has been good for, it has been marvelous from a material standpoint. If you go back to the 1800s before capitalism, um, life expectancy was in the 40 years range. There was no medicine. You could die from just a simple infection. Life was just completely different than it was today. You couldn't, if you're going to travel, if I were to come to India, I mean, it would take months and months for me to travel from my home in Texas to India. And so what's happened is that capitalism has taken the concepts of the Enlightenment, natural resources, and energy, and enabled all of those things to create this exponential surge in knowledge and in materialism. And that's, for those for whom it's good, it's great. Now, all things destroy themselves. One of the principal tenets of my book is that humans take all trends to extreme. Every trend is taken to an extreme. And capitalism is destroying itself for a whole list of reasons that I put forth in the book. So I start the book. This book isn't meant as a slam on capitalism. It's meant to be an examination of the dynamics of capitalism. And what's happening is that for a whole list of reasons having to do with crony capitalism, having to do with the actions of the Federal Reserve, which are strongly anti-capitalistic, which is really ironic. For a whole list of reasons that I've put forth in the book, capitalism is now deteriorating. It's now past its sell-by date. It's now creating more problems than it's solving. And principally, it is creating the destruction of the natural world. And so part of my book is on capitalism. And the second part of the book is on sustainability. It's on, basically it turns the whole argument on its head and asks the question, can we survive capitalism? Because capitalism has become so all-encompassing and so all-devouring that we are destroying our habitat, water, fish, topsoil, and that it's now a negative process that we have to address in order for us to, it's literally existential.
Thank you so much for, that's very valuable information for sharing that. And I can appreciate. So, what, apart from this, what are the other things that you feel people should know about, when it comes to environment, society, or about people that people should know?
Well, the challenge that we face today is the combination of population and consumption. It's not just overpopulation, because a lot of people can live on the earth consuming not much, but much fewer people can do it consuming at high levels. So it's the combination of population and consumption. We have to address both. And so one of the theses of the book is that we're now in a state of what's called overshoot, where that combination is the earth can now not sustain the current combination of population and consumption. So something has to give. And if we don't do something, then nature will do it for us. Nature will not be able to provide all that it's been able to provide. So it simply will not sustain us at the levels that we've been expecting to be sustained. And so what I go through is a list of recommendations of things that we have to do in order to begin to address this, because my argument is that we've already gone too far. So we've got to fix it. The problem is that this isn't high on anybody's radar. People are talking about global warming, and that's a good thing. But they're not talking about sustainability. They're not talking about overpopulation. These are the underlying problems below global warming that we have to address and fix. And we have to do that by addressing a combination of population and consumption. And this is a long discussion that I have in my book with recommendations at the end of things that we can do. But that's the primary message of the book. The message of the book is that capitalism was materially wonderful. It's past its sell-by date, and it's actually now creating problems. And the combination of overpopulation and sustainability is now a serious, serious problem that we must address, because we are entering into a period where things will begin to deteriorate, including capitalism.
One thing that I want to say that your book has a very, very good impact on me. And as an adult, I think everyone should read your book, especially on this age where we come,
Thank you.
so far, where is US or in India or is in any part. This book is kind of, should read by everyone. So for every listeners to our conversation, for everyone. And so if you want to learn more, you can pick up Kit's book, Capitalism is Past, Its Sell by Date, on Amazon. Or so Kit, where else they could go, and where else they can find you online or on social media or website? Where should they head to?
Amazon is the place they can buy the book. If they want to learn more about the book, the website is www.pastsellbydate, one word, pastsellbydate.com. There's summaries, there's information on a table of contents, or lots of reviews. There are things that you can see about the book. I'm available on social media, Twitter at Kit Webster. And the book will be released generally shortly. I'm having some technical problems. Getting Amazon was not a piece of cake, but it was relatively easy to get things published on. I'm working with Ingram right now, trying to get it distributed generally, and I'm having a few technical problems, but I should fix those in the next week or two. And then the book should be available generally.
When the book's available, I'm hoping everyone should get the book as soon as possible when it comes out, on Amazon or any other distributor or retailer website. Well, thank you so much, Kit. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing us the wonderful words about capitalism, and in general things about human behavior, how people think in general about tech. Thank you so much about this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Goodbye.